Greetings to one and all, it's your old buddy Jay here, coming at you with another episode of Countermeasures Game Changer. Now this week I would like to talk about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now Odyssey is a game in the Assassin's Creed franchise. It is the 11th game in the whole set, the mass collection of Assassin's Creed games that now exist. It's not the most recent. I believe it came out in 2018, if I remember correctly, and it is a sequel to the 2017 one, which is Assassin's Creed Origins. So just to cut a long story short, obviously I'm several years behind reviewing this, and the reason being is it's actually taken me this long to complete it. Now, I have actually finished all of the Assassin's Creed games to date except for Valhalla, which I'm about to start in the next week or so. I do enjoy these games. They have massive problems, but they're also loads of fun. I've been with them from right at the very start, and every year or every sort of second year that they come out, I do like to go into them and really sort of lose myself in this kind of this world of assassins. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the story. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of this franchise. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is good about this franchise and what is bad about it, and just basically kind of give a sort of an overall impression of the franchise as a whole, but also then become a little bit more specific when it comes down to Odyssey, because they do make some quite big changes compared to previous iterations of this game. So just a little bit of history of what Assassin's Creed is. So Assassin's Creed, and if I remember correctly, I don't actually have this in my notes, but I believe back in the day Ubisoft were looking to create another Prince of Persia game. So after the Sands of Time and that whole series came out, they're very popular. They started looking at a Prince of Persia game, and then they realized that actually they could do something a little bit different, create a new IP. So they came up with this idea of having a very open world action adventure game, which ultimately was meant to be a stealth game, but through kind of earlier dodgy mechanics, didn't really lend itself to that. You'd attempt to do things in stealth mode, but ultimately every time you encountered somebody, it would ultimately end up in a kind of sword fight. So the idea is that there are assassins, which represent freedom, and then there are Templars that represent the kind of oppression. And the idea is, throughout various stories within your journey, your mission is to assassinate people. Now, when it first came out, Assassin's Creed, it had a lot of movies that kind of really high-end movies that they call bull shots, which are like this is real gameplay, when actually it wasn't. It was a kind of stylized vertical slice of what the game could be. So there are a lot of things where it was all assassins leaping from the tops of buildings and hiding and disguising themselves and then assassinating people throughout history, and it was all very much a kind of a concept sort of phase very, very early on, when they were showing some of the early gameplay and some of the early footage of what this game was going to be, which was ultimately a game where you would progress through the story, assassinate various people, and achieve your objectives. Now, they originally, in the first one, the idea was that the Templars were trying to look into the history of where the assassins originated from, or where the various times that the assassins had done something which was key throughout history, to find these kind of golden orbs. Now, I've got to just check what the name of them were, because they were these strange things that you were basically meant to be collecting that had been sort of lost throughout history, and in the future they were using this machine called the Animus, which you could get into, and then it would send you to different parts of history in order to find out where these lost pieces were. Now, that's right, they're called the Pieces of Eden. So what the Animus did is it would take you back to these moments in history, but The only catch was is that you could only go to those moments in history and experience those moments in history if you had the same DNA or genetic connections to people within that time. So there was a protagonist called Desmond Miles, and his job was to basically be a guinea pig for the Templars to do their research and find these pieces of Eden, and the pieces of Eden would ultimately give them this kind of ultimate weapon of sort of like mass destruction or whatever, that would allow them to tip the balance in their favor, and therefore, you know, the oppressive world of the Templars would be, you know, bolstered by this this great power. So throughout that game, you have to assassinate various people. The story evolves. Spoilers: the story evolves. I mean, we're talking about a game that came out in 2007, so I think it's okay to have a few spoilers. The story evolves, and it turns out that the Templars are obviously, you know, starts off that they're sort of, you don't realize they're Templars, they're trying to help you, and then as the game progresses, you realize that they actually want to take over the world, and it's your job as an assassin to then, you know, prevent them from doing that. So then, obviously, the game goes on, blah, blah, blah. You do prevent them from doing that, and Desmond's the hero, and you get to play a little bit of history. Now, as a unique single game, I think that was quite a good concept. It was quite a nice idea. It was a bit annoying leaping backwards and forwards between the kind of past and present, because you just get yourself involved in this kind of historical moment, and then suddenly it would jump back to the future where you're in this kind of ice white room and putting on slippers and having a shower. You know, it took you out of the moment for sure, but it didn't happen that much in the first one, so you kind of forgave it. Then Assassin's Creed 2 came out, which was ultimately better on all levels. They'd made their money on Assassin's Creed 1. They put a lot of development time into Assassin's Creed 2, made the stories much better, made the historical character you were meant to be. I think in the first one you were a guy called Altair, in the second one you were a guy called Ezio Auditore. So you're in an Italian environment. It was all very exciting, and you know, and they just carried on this kind of Pieces of Eden theme. And you know, your job was to you join the modern day assassins to then prevent the modern day Templars from gaining this power. And again, they stretched that story a little bit thin on the second one, but the gameplay of the history, like in Italy and all around, you know, that kind of olden day assassin in a you know, beautiful towns and countryside, was amazing. And you know, it was I played it on the PS3, absolutely loved it. Again, Assassin's Creed 3 comes out and it wasn't quite so good, and then subsequently there's 4, 5, and you know, time goes on, they get called different things like Assassin's Creed Legacy and you know, all of these different you know, there's one called Black Flag, which was actually one of the more successful ones. But as they go on, they still manage to keep this tentative link to the future of this you know, this sort of battle between good and evil. Meanwhile, everyone who actually loves the franchise does not care about any of that. All they want to do is experience, you know, a historical moment as this kind of badass character that you can slowly build up, and you get your own weapons. As new games came out, it would allow you to do more things. So you could dye your cape a different color, you could update your outfits and your costumes, and you know, the kind of RPG elements started to really inform the gameplay. So you know, you could get new helmets and new assassins gear and new kind of hidden blades and weapons that would all kind of help you in your fighting style. Like I said, the stealth side of things was always they always tried it, but I felt that they never quite succeeded. It was quite weak, and so ultimately I think they lent hard in the later games to try and allow people to experience combat in a much more exciting way. The earlier games, the combat wasn't very strong. It was all meant to be a bit stealthy, but if you failed at that, then you were broke into these kind of breakout fights with people that didn't really work. You know, you'd be like one-on-one fighting someone with a sword. Meanwhile, there'd be like 5 guys who all also wanted to kill you, just stood around waiting for you to finish fighting so you could then fight them. So that mechanic was kind of broken, and as time went on, they actually improved that mechanic so that there was more of a group battle going on, a little bit kind of Batman Arkham Asylum, so that you would fight one person, then you'd fight the person behind you, then you'd fight the person who was beside you. Meanwhile, other people are trying to strike you, things like that made it much more immersive and exciting and less kind of broken. So those kind of mechanics developed over time, and they got better and better with each game. The stories, like I said, I think that that's probably the weakest part, is every time they return Back to the Future. Nobody really wants to do that now. And in this game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla, which I've played a bit of and I've read a little bit about, they do lean a lot less on that. So it kind of every now and again just sort of reminds you that that's happening, but actually they tend to do to sort of lean much harder on the things that people do like, which is just get me in a historical setting as a badass in an RPG. I can grow my character, they can wear whatever they want, so all those elements sort of started to come in, and it just made it much more exciting. One of the games that came out sort of fairly later on was a game called Black Flag, where you were essentially playing as a pirate. That was really exciting because it had really, really great naval combat. So you'd be able to fight other ships. You'd be able to stop off at random islands and discover treasure. You could fight other pirates or whatever the bad guy that was meant to represent the Templars would be, the soldiers, etc. There's some games where you're fighting the English. It's all kind of very sort of well tied together in terms of the kind of historical aspect. It's just when they sort of throw you back into the future that you just kind of it just totally breaks the immersion. So as the games go on, and certainly with these more recent ones, there's a hell of a lot less of that, and I for one applaud that, and for me they could drop that altogether, because having played a lot of other RPGs recently that are kind of based a little bit on kind of historical swordplay, etc., and they don't do any of that. It's just there's no reason to drop it. No one would care now if they just dropped it. There's no reason not to drop it, I should say. So that is one thing. That's the kind of story and the structure. That's a kind of look at what the mechanics were like and how they've improved over time. One of the core mechanics, of course, is that you can climb anything. So that in itself, just as a mechanic, has informed so many other games that have tried to copy it and actually have done it quite well in some instances. I know things like Breath of the Wild. You can climb anything in that, and there's no way that you can look at that game and not see that it's been informed by the Assassin's Creed play style in any way, because it's obviously looked at it, and every handhold in this game now, every little nook and cranny, it's a handhold or a foothold for your character to climb up. Now, in the first couple, it was a little bit more selective over what you could do in terms of what you could grab and what you couldn't, and things you thought you could climb up you couldn't. Obviously, that's just an issue with the mechanics at the time and what they could actually achieve with those systems. Whereas now, on like the PS4 and the PS5, they can achieve a lot with those systems, and they can basically, you can climb anything, you can swing around things. There are things in the games that allow you to sort of cut ropes and fly up in the air, and there's all different ways to traverse the environment, which is again makes it much more exciting. So the other thing that I have to talk about is probably the most successful and the core of this very game, the best design elements within this game has to be the environment. So everything else that goes on, building your character up and all your weapons and the mechanics and all that stuff, that gets better slowly over time. But one thing that has always been consistent in these games, and they progressively get bigger and better every time you play them, is that the environments are amazing. So they've mapped like Egypt and rebuilt structures in Egypt. They've mapped, like in this one, in Odyssey, they've looked at the mythological Peloponnesian War, and they've remapped Athens and what Sparta would have looked like, and they've recreated buildings from crumbled temples, and so if you're working on the team at Ubisoft that are building this, you're traveling the world to all these amazing places and looking at all of the environments and mapping the areas and making them as real as possible. I mean, just from a history point of view, it's incredible. I've learned more playing these games than I ever did in like GCSE history with Mr. Lewin. This is like an absolute masterclass in kind of geography and history. I mean, it is really, really interesting. I mean, as long as you don't pay too much attention to some of the liberties that have been taken with the stories, certainly the environments and the locations are just really, really powerful, and they really give you an idea of what that life might have looked like. And as the games have progressed and they've been sort of put together on much bigger and more powerful systems, and certainly on PC as well, the non-playable characters are living a life within your game. You go anywhere in these massive maps, and there's people, they're building stuff, they're milking goats, there's doctors helping people, there's people feeding their pigs, there's armies warring with each other, there's fights going on, there's wild animals running into towns, and there's events happening all the time. It used to be back in the day when something like that would happen, everyone would be like, oh, there's real life events happening all the time. And now they really are. I mean, it's just insane the amount of other stuff going on within these games that you come across that might change your gameplay entirely. You may be going from one place to another to start a mission, or you may be on a mission already, and something you see or something that passes you may entice you to veer off in a totally different direction. And from that, you might get a new interesting piece of clothing. You might meet a new character who gives you a mission that sends you off in a completely different direction. Like in Odyssey here, I did something similar. I was on one mission, I bumped into this guy, he led me down this sort of path of different sort of subsequent side missions, and eventually I end up fighting this like mythical character, this massive cyclops, and really interesting avenues of branching trees of ideas and missions that can take you anywhere. And I think that as the game's got bigger, there's an argument that it's too big, of course. And to be fair with you, when you open the map for the first time, you're like, wow, this is massive. And then you realize, actually, I'm zoomed in. Then you scale right back and you're like, holy sweet Mother Mary and Joseph. It's like the biggest map I've ever seen. And there's things popping up everywhere in terms of, missions that you can do and things you can go and see. And it is massively overwhelming. But what I like about that is that I have a tendency to, when I'm going through games that have very little quests going on, I have to finish them all. I feel there's like an OCD part of me that I have to go through all of them and complete them in order to complete the game. Now, with Assassin's Creed, now I know that I can't do that unless I basically just quit my job, leave my wife and family, and just go and live in a basement somewhere for the next 6 years just to finish that one game. It's never ever going to happen. So it makes choice, you've got a lot more choice, and it makes choice a lot easier, which is, you can follow the path, you can do a few side missions, you're never going to accomplish them all, and your story is then just your story, and it builds around you as you go. And I do like that now. And you don't have to do everything. Excuse me, although there are people out there that are 100% completionists. I wish I was one of them. I'm just not. And also, having played this game, like I said, for like the last 3 years, I'm pretty glad I finished it. Now, I started it, I really enjoyed it. I'm actually going to get down to talking about this game now. You started with the option of playing as a boy or a girl, which is always good, and no non-binary options in the past, I'm afraid. But in this particular game, you are either, I think you're Alexios or Cassandra. And I usually just play as the male character, but on this occasion I played as the female character because I'd heard that her voice acting was much better, so I went with her. And Cassandra, she was absolutely brilliant. I absolutely loved her story and the way that played out, and the interaction she had with all of the characters, and all of her dialogue and all of her facial animations and everything were just incredible. I absolutely loved it. Now, the previous game for this, Assassin's Creed Origins, really stepped things up and turned it into an RPG, on a level that it hadn't been before. And then this takes another giant leap in that direction, and it's just so successful. It is one of those games where you can get lost in it for days and days, and like me, years. I've played a lot of it. It's one of those games where, I've played a lot of this, and I probably clocked in about 60 or 70 hours on it, something like that, over the time that I played it. And that comes from starting it ages ago. I played for like about 10 hours. I got to a bit where it got a little bit grindy. It put me off, so I stopped for a while. I played a lot of other games. Time went by. Then I came back to it when I was in a mood for doing a little bit more grindy work. And I just kept doing that, and slowly and gradually over the last 3 years, I did actually finish her quests and all her main missions and a whole load of side stuff. And it was really, really an amazing experience. And it was one of those games where I didn't stop thinking about it during the whole time. Anytime I was playing something else, or I felt like I could just dive into this and play for an hour, I did that. And I really felt that this was a game that you could pick up and put down. Now, with other games, I feel that if you do that, you lose the thread of what you're doing, and you might lose the idea of the direction you're heading in, or story beats and things like that. Whereas with this, they'd actually accounted for the fact that people were going to be be playing this for a long time. So there's a lot of recaps on the story. There's a lot of, if you haven't been into it for a while, you can go back into your mission logs and all the kind of little highlights of previous missions that you've completed and where you are. Very simple and laid out, which I really appreciated on this occasion. I just thought that they accomplished that very well. I liked that mechanic of, being able to put it down for a long time, go back to it, and you didn't really feel like you'd lost anything. Or you could just, there was occasions when I'd sit down over the course of a week maybe and do 15 or 20 hours. And again, you get a lot out of that as well. I just feel like they really nailed the balance of that, and that's something that this game does incredibly well. Now, I know it has been received very well, and it's obviously opened up the door for Valhalla, which is the next version of this, where it's much more of a Nordic theme. So when I've finished that in about 5 years' time, I'll come back and talk about it. But yeah, I did think that like we're looking at here, the thing that slightly lets some of the other games down is that when you go into the menu system, it's all a little bit crazy and you're not really quite sure what's going on. A lot of games now are taking on the Destiny approach to what the menu systems are like, and the reason is that it works really well. Allows you to navigate easily where everything is. You know where you are. You've got your cursor. It can roll over things, or you can use your top buttons to flick through stuff. It just allows you to go in and check your inventory very quickly. It allows you to break down materials that maybe you're collecting as you're going around very easily. Gives you a very quick update on where everything is. The map's easy to get to. There's a whole section of this where you're chasing down a whole load of cultists because you're basically trying to find your brother who's been lost and reunite your family, and your mother who's been lost. And so the cultists are leading you towards doing that, but also they are the kind of the Templars of the time, the people that are sort of the evil and you are the good, even though you do go around massacring people. And the animations for the assassinations now have got so gruesome that I don't even notice them, actually, because like I've been playing it for a while, I don't even notice them. And then the other day I was just watching some footage of this that I captured, and I was like, geez, this is like so brutal. It's like you talk about other games like Call of Duty where you're shooting people, and that at least has an arcadey feel to it. That has a kind of like, you've killed that guy, oops, you've been killed, it was brutal, bloody for a moment, but then you're back into the game and you're playing. There's an arcadey feel about that. But with this, you're like sneaking up with people, you're sticking your sword in people's spines, cutting their heads off, chopping their arms off. I mean, it is so brutal and realistic to a level where you're so immersed in this world that after a while it just became like second. It didn't even occur to me that was happening, because it was programming me to accept the fact that that's just this world that you live in. And maybe that's a sign of a successful game. Maybe it's also a sign that psychologically it's probably done me some massive damage. But anyway, it is very realistic, and again, the art that's gone into this and the time that's gone into making those visceral moments very brutal is amazing. And credit and hats off to the people that have programmed this and worked on it. It was Ubisoft Quebec, I believe, that actually worked on it. And you can't fault the graphics in any way. I mean, the graphics, when I started playing it on the PS4, I thought it was wonderful, and it was 30 frames a second and 1080p or whatever, and it was fine. And I thought that it looked really, really good. And again, Origins prior to this did also look good. And then I started playing it on the PS5. It was obviously a bit quicker, and there were a few kind of little updates, but it was still 30 frames a second. So I got back into it for a while, and I was enjoying it for a while. But actually, having come off games like Ratchet and Clank and things like that are 60 frames a second, and some of them 120 frames a second at 4K and or 4K upscale, I really was starting to notice the difference. And I thought, well, maybe I'll kind of draw the game to the end or try and get to a quick conclusion or whatever. But then literally the week that I thought that, they brought out a patch, and they upscaled everything 60 frames a second at 4K. So it already looked really pretty when it was static, less movement. But then as soon as they did the 60 frame per second 4K option, it just turned this game into like an absolute delight to play. So and again, the facial animations, the time that's gone into the detailing of everything, from the walls to the armor, the weapons, the dust in the air, the hairs on the horse. I mean, I can't rave about it enough. I absolutely think that this game went from, this whole franchise went from being sort of a successful launch, peaking at, the Assassin's Creed 2, then a gradual decline into a yearly release or bi-yearly release of Assassin's Creed games that people who only really love the franchise got into. And then it hits Origins and this, and it just absolutely goes through the roof. It's just, it is, you know, they've done an absolute outstanding, outstanding work on this game. I do think this is one of my sort of more favorite RPGs. I did really love playing it. Now, I'm not going to spoil the end. I would say that as time has gone on, you know, this game and this franchise does suffer from loot boxes. I have to put that in there because, you know, if you've watched any of my other videos, and I'm sure if you've watched any other people that review games or talk about the design of them or talk about the mechanics, etc., they will tell you that the loot boxes are egregious. And when the franchise first started, there was a lot of kind of box opening and hidden things you could find, etc., and some free DLC and downloading clothes and different outfits and things like that. And as the games went on, you got a little bit more of that, a little bit more. And then Ubisoft realized that actually we could charge for that. So when it first all started coming out, there were maybe a few different outfits you could have for Ezio, you know, things like that would cost you like 79p or you know, that kind of stuff. They were just testing the water to see if anybody was interested in actually purchasing this stuff, and the answer is yes. It absolutely paved the way for what we now hate as loot boxes. It's probably one of the first franchises, one of the first set of games to ever really do it on a console or a PC. I mean, mobiles have obviously been doing that in games a lot for years and years, but taking that model and then putting it into something like this has just changed the game generally for all of modern day games on console and PC, because now when you buy a game like this, you can, you know, there's a shop section within the menu, which is so easy just to flick to, and suddenly the amount of times I'm playing this game and I'm just tabbing through the tops and suddenly I find myself being led to the store, and then you go into the store and basically there's a whole load of different costumes and outfits, and there's a whole load of stuff that you can buy to sort of help you on your game, your progression. I mean, I can't remember if it was Origins or this one. I think it might have been this one. When it first came out, you had the option to have an XP boost. So the idea behind that was that you could just play the game normally, but you would hit these points in the game that would become really grindy and slow the story right down. The idea being is that, you know, you could go off and do all these side missions, you could slowly build up your levels to move up to the next sections to allow you to do the next missions, but they would be really slow. So you could pay for an XP booster that would give you like a 50% upgrade, which meant that every bit of XP that you were getting would be doubled. So it would speed up the time that it would take you to actually get through the game. And that in itself is just absolutely outrageous that anyone would do that. I can understand, you know, I mean, I'm a father of two. I understand that time is limited, but you're essentially paying, you already bought the game. You're paying to win. You're paying to get through the game quicker. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So that was something that came under a lot of criticism with, I don't know if Origins did it, but it certainly was a big talking point of this game when it launched in 2018. And I just feel that like that's something that they've got to be really wary of, because people are sick of loot boxes. You know, you don't have to buy into any of this stuff. You can play through the entire game without touching any of that stuff, but your experience will be better. You will have a better time if you embrace some of that. Now, hands in the air, I bought like sort of one of the deluxe sets right at the start when this game came out, the digital version. It came with some extra bits and pieces, and on a few occasions I did actually go in and buy some cool bits of armor and cool things that you could kind of wear throughout your, because, you know, I wasn't getting them within the game. Time was passing on. I was like, well, actually I want my character to look good. I like Cassandra, she's an interesting character. I'm doing some cool things. Stealth actually works really well. The combat in this game is really good. The combat system is amazing. You know, when you're fighting people now, it's just like so intuitive and in tune. I spent a lot of time making this really, really tight in terms of the combat sections. So yeah, the whole kind of thing as a package is now amazing. And, you know, it's hopefully introducing new people to the franchise. It's hopefully getting people back who have played previous games, who think they know what Assassin's Creed is, but actually it's something different now. And you know, there definitely is a conversation to be had about the grinding element. I hear there is quite a bit of grinding in Valhalla as well, you know, but, you know, you're going to pay to sort of get through that quicker. Again, I just think that is kind of disgusting. You can avoid it, like I said. So I'm going to have to mark the game down for giving you that option and for them insisting on that, and the fact that it's so easy to trip over the shop, and accidentally find yourself in there, and and I'm thinking about 11, 12-year-old kids playing this, and they're going to be dropping into that all the time. Of course, they're going to be tempted by all this cool armor. You can't get like a neon glowing horse in the game, but you can buy it in the store and then have it in your game. I mean, who doesn't want a neon glowing horse, or like future horse? Sounds awesome. So of course they're going to monetize that. Of course they're going to keep all that stuff locked behind a paywall, and that's something that people are going to have to deal with going forward, because I don't think these are ever going to go away. It's that mobile game model which has snuck into all games, and it's something that Ubisoft have come under a lot of criticism for. Among other things, they've been in trouble for all sorts of things recently, but you cannot fault the fact that they do have some pretty amazing games. So I think I'm going to try and wrap up a little bit now, because I've been talking for way too long. This is probably my longest review, but Assassin's Creed is such a huge franchise, and I do have a little place for it. It's my guilty pleasure in my heart. I do like coming back to these games. I mean, just to round up, I think I'm glad they've started dropping a lot more of the future stuff. Like I said, that's something that was holding it back. They're starting to embrace more of the historical elements, and as going forward, I'd be happy for them to drop that altogether. I think the story for Odyssey is particularly good, one of the best ones so far for sure. I think the acting's amazing. I think the voice acting's amazing. I think all the motion graphics, all of the environments, all of the locations are just brilliant and overwhelming. And people are complaining that the maps are too big. I say make them bigger. Let's turn it into I see a game in the future where it's like an Assassin's Creed world, and you could go anywhere. That would be a pretty cool thing to be able to do. But they're getting there for sure, because you're hopping from continents to continents and within countries. It's just really really pushing the envelope, and I appreciate that for sure. And it's trickling down into other games. It's a good test bed for other games, and other games look at this, regardless of what people think of the franchise itself. They look at this as a benchmark for a lot of this stuff. It has its bugs, like all games do, but you can't have a game of this size without running the risk of that, and I think that's something that you just learn to accept. And actually, with my experience with this one, is that there were very little bugs, despite people saying when it initially came out there were a lot. And that says something about waiting to play a game as well, which is like, you can rush to play on day one. There's games that I do that for. Mainly the kind of shorter single player games I tend to do that for. I know that if I just wait a little longer for some of these larger games where they've got things going on, like Cyberpunk, there's stuff happening in them where they're going to have to address bug issues, etc. If you just wait a little bit to go back into it and play, I think you get a better experience. And I think that's something that I feel that I've benefited from by taking so bloody long to finish it. So yeah, that's pretty much my review of this whole game. Love the design, love the story. I just think that they absolutely nailed it on this. I think that it's sitting there on my hard drive, and there's so much more to do. If I just wanted to play this game indefinitely for another 50 or 60 hours, indefinitely for 60 hours, well, for another 60 hours, I could easily do that, because there's so much more going on. The DLC packs, yes, you do have to buy them, but they give you like another 20 or 30 hours of gameplay, and they really let you experience this world to its absolute maximum. And I think that that's something that this is incredibly successful at. And it is, I can't call it one of my games of the year, because like I said, I started it 3 years ago, but it's definitely up there on one of the best, modern Western RPGs. It has to be. There isn't many things that come close to it. So I'm going to wrap up by saying I've got to give it a mark out of 10. And the problem is that I do love this franchise. It's had its ups and downs, but I have to mark this game as a single game in its own right, regardless of all of the rest. The fact that they've dropped a lot of the background crap that's going on with the previous games, I think is good. The story's really good. I mean, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. I think it's a 9. I couldn't give it a 10. It does have problems. The loot boxes definitely are an issue. And again, the grinding is definitely an issue. I think I'm going to have to give it an 8, actually. I think I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, and it gets marked down purely for the XP boost. I think that it's an excessive thing that people are starting to put into these games now. I really hope that that particular part of the loot boxes tends to sort of die off and not of interest to people. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it is an interest to people. I think people will continue to pay to speed the game up, which is just bananas to me. But people want to experience the story, and the story is really good. So yeah, I think solid 8 out of 8, verging on a 9, but I think an 8 out of 10 for sure. So that's it. That's my review for Assassin's Creed in general, and also my Assassin's Creed Odyssey review. I need to work on that. I don't know. I've done a few of these now. My Assassin's Creed Odyssey review. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a long one, so apologies for that. I had a lot to talk about. And my next few games won't be Assassin's Creed orientated, but at some point in the future, like I said, probably in like 2048, when I've finished Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I would like to come back and talk about that as well, because I'm interested to see the transition in sort of 3 years from what this game is to what the most recent iteration of the franchise is. So I'm definitely going to talk about that. So that's it. So all that's left to say is be good, stay safe, and be kind to one another. Cheers.